Addiction isn't really about drugs. It's about a kind of pain that has never had a chance to speak up, a deep emptiness that learned how to scream. When we think about addiction, we often picture other people, the alcoholics, the drug users, the ones society calls lost. But what if I told you that some of the most common forms of addiction don't involve rehab or substances at all? These are addictions to achievement, to constant validation, to endlessly scrolling through our phones. And the scary part, most people don't even realize they're caught in it. Carl Jung once said, "Addiction is the soul's desperate cry for wholeness." It's not just a chemical imbalance or a flaw in character. It's a spiritual fracture. Jung saw addiction, not as just a problem, but as a message. It's the psyche trying to tell us that we've lost something sacred. So quitting a substance alone isn't enough. The hunger behind it stays with us. And if you pay close attention, you can see that hunger inside yourself too. That restless need to avoid silence, the urge to open an app, to seek someone's approval, to run from your own thoughts. This is addiction. But what if the real cure isn't just sobriety? What if what we're really craving is meaning? This isn't a video about drugs. It's about that quiet part of you that's been running for years, unnoticed. And it's time to finally listen. We've been fed a story about addiction, a simple and convenient one. It's all about bad choices, weak willpower, broken people. That story makes it easy for us to criminalize addiction, to mock it, or push it away. But what if that story isn't true? What if everything society teaches us, rehab centers, recovery slogans, is only scratching the surface and hiding something much deeper, much more human, and frankly, much more terrifying? Mainstream science tends to frame addiction as a chemical hijacking of the brain, a dopamine loop, a substance abuse issue. And yes, that part is true, but it's dangerously incomplete. This view turns addiction into a technical malfunction, something outside the soul, something fixable with the right pills or programs or punishments. But Jung didn't see it that way. To him, addiction wasn't a disease in the body to be cured. It was a singular, spiritual symptom. This subtle but powerful shift changes everything. It means the addict isn't just chemically dependent. They are starving, existentially starved. Their substance, whether it's heroin or alcohol, sex, or power, achievement, is more than just a habit. It's a ritual, a failed attempt to fill an internal void, a void modern society doesn't even want to acknowledge. Now, let's talk about that popular myth you've probably heard all your life. Addiction is a choice. If someone really wanted to stop, they could. Just use willpower. Grow up. They're selfish, irresponsible, weak. But here's the truth that Jung understood deeply. Addiction is not about choice. It's about compulsion, and compulsion always points to something buried deep inside the psyche. People aren't addicted because they're weak. They're addicted because they're wounded. And that's the part society misses so dangerously. When we shame addicts, what really happens is we silence the very message their addiction is trying to shout out loud. Something vital inside is missing. Think about this. A man drinks every night, not to ruin his life, but because that's the only way he can numb the pain inside. A woman checks her phone hundreds of times a day, not because she is shallow, but because the silence inside her mind terrifies her. A student works 16 hours a day not because he loves discipline, but because he's terrified of feeling worthless. These are not just habits or bad choices. They're coping mechanisms, unconscious ways people try to soothe a psychological wound. And if we punish addiction without healing the wound beneath, the addiction will simply morph into something else. Jung believed every addiction is a substitute for authentic connection to the self, to a deep, integrated spiritual core that modern life constantly cuts us off from. He famously said, "No one is really cured of addiction unless and until they've achieved some kind of spiritual understanding." And that doesn't mean religion. It means meaning, real meaning, wholeness, the ability to face your inner darkness and bring it into the light instead of running away. But our culture, we don't talk about this. We pathologize addiction, but we ignore the hunger beneath it. We build rehab clinics, but we tear down spiritual wisdom. We treat addicts but mock introspection. We numb our own pain with little dopamine hits, judge those whose distractions spiral out of control. This is why Jung's take matters now more than ever. Because if we see addiction not as a defect, but as a signaler, flare in the night sky from a soul that's drowning, then healing becomes possible. The moment we stop judging addiction as moral failure and start seeing it as a symbolic cry, we can begin to understand its deeper truth. Why do we keep reaching for things that destroy us? Why do we return again and again to the bottle, the needle, the screen, or the applause, even when we know the cost? Jung's answer is simple, but chilling. People don't have addictions. They have spiritual voids. That crushing emptiness inside is the real source of addiction, the root of our compulsions. We live in a world obsessed with science, but blind to the soul. A world that treats humans like machines, just inputs and outputs, hormones and habits. But Jung saw the psyche as sakrida, spiritual battleground where ancient forces fight in silence. To Jung, addiction wasn't a medical disorder. It was a metaphysical shout, a symptom of a deeper loss, the loss of connection to the self, the God within. Now, here's the key. When Jung said God, he didn't just mean a religious figure in the sky. He meant something deeply psychological, the inner source of wholeness, purpose, and truth. In Jung's language, God symbolizes the self, the integrated, whole version of you beneath all the masks, the traumas, and the ego. When we lose connection to that self, the psyche leaks energy. It desperately tries to reconnect to something bigger, something sacred. This is where Jung's idea of psychic energy comes in. Think of psychic energy like spiritual electricity. It powers your dreams, your fears, your creativity, and yes, your compulsions. It never stops moving. It never disappears. So when we repress emotions, ignore wounds, or chase meaningless goals for survival, that energy doesn't just vanish. It diverts, often into addiction. Jung believed addicts usually unconsciously seek union with the divine, not through meditation or self, but through artificial substitutes, substances, sensations, or obsessions. A man who drinks until he blacks out isn't weak. He's trying to escape a self that feels unbearable. A woman who chases love from toxic partners isn't trying to feel seen by something bigger than herself. These are spiritual longings, a need for wholeness that has been distorted by trauma and misunderstood by society. Let's get real for a minute. Most people today, whether they realize it or not, have addictions. And it's not always about drugs or alcohol. Sometimes it's about avoiding our own reality. Think about it. Addicted to distraction, to work, to trying to control everything, or seeking approval from others. We scroll, not because anything on our screens truly interests us, but because sitting still scares us. We chase achievement, not always out of big dreams, but because feeling invisible is even scarier. The hardest part, we can't seem to stop. And the reason is simple. Stopping would mean we'd have to face the truth. We're in pain, we're disconnected, we feel empty. But here's where Jung flips the script. He says pain isn't just something to avoid, it's our compass. It points straight to what inside us needs attention. What part of our soul has gone quiet? What truly needs healing? It forces us to ask ourselves, what am I really hungry for? And the answer is almost never pleasure or distraction. It's not even relief. What we're really hungry for is integration, a sense of being whole. We don't need more punishment. We don't need shame. We need to find that sacred thread that links us back to our truest selves, the part of us that gives all our suffering actual meaning. But here's the wild paradox. The only way out of this trap is to go deeper. Not to numb the pain, but to listen to what it has to say. Not to fight the emptiness, but to lean in and ask what it's trying to reveal. So, what's the takeaway here? Addiction isn't about being weak. It's not about chasing pleasure. At its core, it's about emptiness as soul, desperately looking for reconnection. A mind that's overwhelmed by the silence inside. And until we restore that connection, until we quit treating addiction like a disease and start seeing it as a spiritual symptom, we're just confusing the craving for the cure. Whenever people hear the word addiction, they picture needles, pills, maybe a bottle. But honestly, the most dangerous addictions today aren't found in bottles or syringes. They're hiding everywhere, in pixels, in likes and unread messages, in the endless scroll of our feeds. These invisible drugs are perfectly legal, totally accepted, and, in many cases, more addictive than anything you could buy on the street. How does society respond? We now check our phones hundreds of times a day. We chase every quick hit of validation like lab rats hunting for sugar. We binge watch, doom scroll, swipe, consume, not because it's fun, but because we're numb inside. This is the new face of addiction. It's sinister too, because it hides in plain sight, sometimes even behind a smile or a productivity badge. Jung warned us, modern people are spiritually starving, not for old-school religion, but for genuine inner connection. When the soul is hungry, it settles for whatever substitute it can find. Like, the guy who spends hours on adult sites isn't looking for simple pleasure, he's searching for intimacy that feels safe, without risk. The woman who obsesses over her productivity might not just be a go-getter, she could be terrified of facing stillness. The teen posting selfie after selfie isn't just vain, they're scared of not being seen. These aren't just bad habits, they're all cries for wholeness. And here's the kicker. Society has cleverly figured out how to turn our pain into profit. Our cravings are now billion-dollar industries. Let's clarify something: social media isn't evil, work isn't evil, and seeking validation isn't evil either. The real issue is why we use them. Jung believed that when a person loses their inner sense of meaning, when they're cut off from themselves, they become much more vulnerable to compulsive behaviors. Why? Because they no longer know who they are without constant stimulation, so they chase relentless noise to drown out the silence within. Addiction isn't about the object itself, it's about the role that object plays in our psyche. And here's an uncomfortable truth. The way our brains get hooked on social media is almost identical to how drugs hook us. Both hijack our dopamine system, create tolerance, withdrawal, and a strong sense of compulsion. Both mask a deeper hunger that's never satisfied. So, addiction isn't really about what you're doing, it's about what you're trying not to feel. Take a typical morning, for example. Someone wakes up and immediately grabs their phone. They scroll through emails, notifications, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. They don't even know exactly what they're looking for, they just know they can't stop. By noon, maybe they've checked their phone 70 times already. And somehow, they feel even more anxious, hollow, or ashamed. But why can't they stop? Because the second the phone is out of their hands, they're left alone with themselves, and they don't like what they find there. Jung would say this person isn't addicted to their phone, they're scared of sitting with their own mind. That person isn't broken, they're just starving for stillness, for truth, for meaning. But instead of turning within, they look outward, hoping that maybe, this time, something will finally fill the emptiness. We live in a world obsessed with numbing pain instead of sitting with it. We anesthetize our discomfort instead of listening to what it has to say. We sedate our symptoms instead of exploring their meaning and purpose. But here's something ancient, something powerful. The psyche doesn't work like that. Whatever you suppress doesn't just vanish, it waits. And when it comes back, it's often disguised, distorted, even more desperate. This is exactly why modern addictions feel endless. The craving isn't for the thing itself, it's for connection. And the real solution isn't consuming more, it's growing more aware. Jung's approach was never about fighting addiction head-on. It wasn't about piling on the shame, guilt, or even just sheer discipline. His strategy was much gentler and, in some ways, much braver. He told us to listen, to see addiction not as a flaw, but as a symbol, a metaphor sent from the unconscious mind. It's the psyche's way of saying, you've lost touch with yourself. You're not scrolling because you're bored. You're scrolling because your soul is tired of not being heard. These modern addictions are sneaky. They're not traps because of the actual tools we use, but because we've forgotten the tools we have inside. Your phone isn't the enemy. Your work isn't the enemy. The real enemy is the unending cycle of anything that helps you run from your true self. And if we don't stop, reflect, and re-enter ourselves, the cycle keeps going. Because addiction isn't just about what's grabbing your attention, it's about what you're desperate to avoid. Here's the harsh reality. You can quit drinking and still feel lost. You can delete your social apps and still crave distraction. You can be clean and still be stuck in an addictive pattern. Real recovery isn't about just stopping, it's about changing from the inside out. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." Nowhere does this ring truer than with addiction. We think we're fighting a habit, but we're really fighting a part of ourselves. And the thing is, no one ever wins a war against their own soul. Most people try to recover by staying away from the thing that hurt them. They swap drugs for therapy, or replace pornography with productivity, or fill their time with wellness routines and spiritual bypassing. But no matter what, there's always that lingering emptiness, a quiet pull, a haunting thought. Something inside still feels off. Why? Because they only fixed the surface problem, the symptom. But the root, the wound beneath the addiction, is left untouched. You can get clean, but if you don't meet that wound, that pain beneath, your addiction will return someday in a new form. Jung believed addiction is more than just behavior. It's a message from the unconscious, a cry from the part of you that's been buried, ignored, or unloved. He called this part the shadow, the side of you you hide even from yourself. It's the pain you never dealt with, the shame you buried deep, the unmet needs you learned to suppress to survive. Here's the twist. That shadow is actually the real source of addiction, not the drug, not the phone, not dopamine. It's the inner child who wasn't seen, the young self who learned love was conditional, the wound that felt too raw to bear, so it disguised itself. Imagine a man who drinks every night, not at parties or celebrations, but because he wants to escape a feeling he doesn't understand. He tells himself he has a drinking problem, but the real problem is silence. Because when he's silent, he hears a voice he's been avoiding. You're not enough. You'll always be alone. That voice isn't new, it's ancient. It comes from a moment in childhood he never fully faced, and the alcohol, it's not the enemy, it's the shield. This is why Jung said recovery isn't about self-control, it's about self-confrontation. You don't heal addiction by fighting the craving or cutting it off. You heal it by meeting the part of you that's craving something deeper, and that kind of healing takes courage. Not loud, dramatic courage, but quiet courage. The courage to sit alone in a room with no distractions, no screens, and ask yourself, what am I really afraid to feel? That question marks the start of true recovery, because beneath every addiction lies not only pain but also potential. Jung loved to use myths and symbols to explain the psyche. One of his most powerful metaphors goes like this: addiction is like a dragon guarding treasure. The dragon is terrifying. It breathes fire and tears down everything in its path. But behind the dragon, there is gold. That gold is your true self, your soul, your wholeness. The addiction isn't there to destroy you. It's there to protect you from facing something you're not ready to face until now. Recovery isn't about slaying the dragon. It's about understanding it, asking, why are you here? What have you been trying to protect me from? This is what Jung called shadow work. It's not easy. It won't give you quick highs or overnight wins, but it gives you something far more powerful: integration. The moment you stop seeing addiction as a monster and start seeing it as a messenger, that's when healing truly begins. You see, the addict isn't weak. They're someone carrying unprocessed intensity, unspoken truth, a hunger for something sacred that was never truly reflected back to them in the world. Escape isn't failure. It's the first clue that something inside you wants to be found. Jung believed that inside every addiction lies a seed of transformation, but that seed can only grow when we stop running and start listening. So, the real question isn't how do I stop? It's what is this pain trying to teach me? What am I really longing for? Because the opposite of addiction isn't just sobriety. It's authenticity. It's becoming whole. It's facing your dragon, claiming your treasure, and realizing that what you once feared as weakness was actually the doorway to your true self. Most recovery programs revolve around one idea: control. Control your urges, control your triggers, control your environment. But Carl Jung taught that true healing doesn't come from control, it comes from wholeness, and the journey to wholeness, Jung called it individuation. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect. It's not about erasing your flaws. It's about becoming genuine. It's the process of discovering every part of yourself, including the parts you were taught to hide, fear or hate, and bringing them together into one real, conscious self. Jung once said, "I'd rather be whole than good." This isn't self-improvement, it's self-realization. It's realizing the parts of you tried to get rid of. The anger, the desire, the pain were never your enemies. They were parts of your story waiting to be heard and understood. Addiction keeps us divided. It splits us into who we are by day and who we escape to by night. There's the mask you wear and the wound beneath it. But individuation says, bring all of you to the table. You can't heal what you refuse to face. You can't transform what you still reject. Individuation begins when you stop asking, how do I fix myself? And start asking, who am I really? Who are you beneath? The fear, the craving, the mask. At the heart of individuation is the shadow, the hidden part of your psyche, holding everything you've pushed away. To become whole, you have to face that shadow. Not destroy it or suppress it, but meet it. talk with it, integrate it. Jung believed healing happens when the conscious mind meets the unconscious, when you stop pushing away your pain and allow it to speak, because the parts of yourself you fear the most often hold your deepest truths. This is what separates real recovery from mere behavioral control. Control-based recovery says, don't do that. Individuation asks, why are you doing that? Control punishes relapse. Individuation studies it, asks what part of you is hurting, what unmet need. It reveals. Control is about surviving the day. Individuation is about reclaiming your life. You see, the wound you carry holds energy. When you don't know it's there, it controls you. But when you bring it into consciousness, that energy can transform you. This is what Jung meant by transmutation. Pain becomes purpose, longing becomes insight. The addiction that once felt like death becomes a door to rebirth. Imagine a woman addicted to validation. She posts non-stop, performs, pretends everything's fine, but inside, she feels hollow. That's where Jungian work begins. Instead of quitting her behaviors cold turkey, she studies them. She uncovers the truth. Her addiction to being seen is really a fear of being unseen, a wound from childhood when she felt invisible. Slowly, change comes not from forced willpower, but from understanding. She writes, reflects, and connects with that younger version of herself. She tells her, I see you now. That's transformation. That's individuation. Individuation doesn't erase your past, it redeems it. It says, your addiction wasn't random. It was an invitation to meet yourself, to walk into the darkness and come out with light, to stop asking the world to fill your void and start becoming the presence you've always needed. Jung said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Addiction often hides behind attempts to avoid suffering. But individuation teaches us that some suffering is sacred. It's part of the alchemy that turns brokenness into beauty. You don't suffer because you're weak. You suffer because you've been called to wake up, to live from your soul, not just your surface. This is why rules alone can't heal you. Rules control behavior, but meaning transforms identity. And recovery without meaning, that's fragile. You might stay sober but feel empty. You might stay clean but stay lost. But when your healing finds meaning, when you see your wounds not as curses, but as callings, the path becomes sustainable. Because you're not just avoiding the fall, you're building something deeper, a self rooted in truth, a life aligned with the soul. So, the real recovery, it doesn't begin when you quit the substance. It begins when you quit hiding from yourself. Individuation is a call to return not to who you were before addiction, but to who you were always meant to become. Not just sober, but soulful. Not just functioning, but fully alive. Addiction wears many faces. Some people shoot heroin. Others scroll endlessly. Some chase success, sex, shopping, or approval. But beneath all these masks lies one common wound: emptiness. And here's a hard truth. Everyone's addicted to something, because everyone is running from something. Somewhere along the way, we learned to silence the salt, to numb instead of feel, to perform instead of just be. But Carl Jung didn't see addiction as weakness. He saw it as a simpler cry from the unconscious, a longing not for dopamine or distraction, but for divinity. Addiction, in Jung's view, isn't about pleasure, it's about pain. A hunger for meaning, cleverly disguised as craving. Maybe you feel that hunger, the ache you can't quite explain, the scrolling that won't stop, the drinking that feels like drowning, the working that never satisfies. Listen carefully, that emptiness is not your enemy, it's your invitation. Jung once wrote, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Maybe your hell is addiction, but maybe that descent is the only path to real depth. To find the light, you have to face the dark. You are not broken. You're being called not to escape yourself, but to meet yourself. Your craving isn't a curse, it's a compass. And maybe, just maybe, your soul isn't screaming for drugs, distraction, or approval. It's screaming for God. And when you finally listen, you'll realize you were never empty. So maybe you're hearing all this and you're wondering, where do I go from here? What now if I recognize my own patterns, my own emptiness? Well, here's something important. This journey isn't about shaming yourself or aiming for perfection or crossing off some mythical finish line called healed. Jung showed us that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, it's human, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. The point isn't to become flawless. The point is to become whole, to bring together all those parts of you, the strong, the scared, the messy, the wise, into one authentic self. Ask yourself, with honesty and compassion, what is this pain trying to teach me? What have I been running from? Where have I been hiding from my own discomfort? And what might happen if, just for a moment, I sit with it instead of running? Maybe that means swapping endless scrolling for a few moments of stillness, just breathing, letting the silence say what it needs to say. Maybe it means journaling about what you're really craving, or maybe it's reaching out for connection. But this time, with awareness, not compulsion, with a desire to be seen, not just distracted. The dragon guarding the treasure of your soul isn't there to stop you. It's there to make sure you're ready for the gold, the richness that comes with meeting every part of yourself. And the more you listen, the braver you become, not because you're fearless, but because you're willing to show up as you are. Remember, individuation, the process Jung described, doesn't throw away your so-called bad parts. It weaves them into your wholeness. The anger, the desire, the grief, they're not stains on your character. They're pages in the story of who you're becoming. So, whenever that old craving comes back, whether it's a scroll through your feed, a craving for applause, or the urge to escape, pause and ask, what am I really longing for? What truth is waiting for my attention? The biggest gift you can give yourself is to make room for your whole experience. The shadow, the light, the pain, and the possibility. Bringing those together, that is healing. That is return. That's how you move from just surviving to truly living. And maybe, by choosing wholeness instead of perfection, by welcoming your full story, you'll realize something astonishing. You were never as empty as you feared. The hunger itself was always an invitation not to search for something out there, but to discover the depth, meaning, and sacredness waiting within. So, if you've made it this far, maybe it's time to let the journey begin, to meet yourself with honesty, to let go of shame, and to trust that your pain has a purpose, to lead you home. You don't need to run from your cravings. You need to listen to their message, because the soul screaming for God, for meaning, for connection, was never broken. It was always calling you back to the truth of who you are. This isn't just about quitting a substance. It's about reclaiming your soul, not just sobriety, but integration, not just empty achievement, but authentic presence. This is the path to wholeness. This is how we heal. Thank you for listening, for the courage to stay with your own story, and for daring to find wholeness where you once saw only emptiness.